Hey everybody, let's see, I am going to give you a quick live and you can always chime in later. If you need any help, feel free to comment if you need any help later. Today I'm going to give you just a quick strategy for our children that struggle with all things school. Some kids are, I actually just did a podcast interview last night and we were talking about how to help emergency homeschoolers, how to help people in this season. Hey, Sarah, how to help different people in this season, especially those that are homeschooling for the first time. And so in this interview that we were doing last night, one thing that I really understood about myself and about my mission is to really equip the mom whose child just thinks and processes the world differently. And so a lot of times, you know, when I first started this journey, I was using the term special needs. And that is definitely what I offer, and what I like to do is work with any child who has just a difference cognitively or just processes the world differently. But the reality is this: we all are different. We all process things different. We all have different things that are going to frustrate us more than others. And so in this particular video, I'm going to offer you a strategy that is going to serve the child who struggles in any way, shape, or form with schoolwork. For the child that melts down every time they even think about doing school, or for the child that struggles or says they hate to read, the child that says they hate to do math, the child that says I'm stupid, the child that says why do I, that just is constantly resistant to all things school. This strategy can work for anybody, any child, any human being on the face of the earth who is struggling. This is a strategy to try. So I put out a post, I noticed this week. So here's a Post-it. This is actually not even an official Post-it. This is just like a sticky piece of paper that you can just, it's like a Post-it, but this is a big one. And I was using it a lot this week with my older daughter. We've been doing algebra, and some of you know we hit a wall with functions and we've overcome the wall, but we are now doing another concept that required a lot of word problems, okay? So this is gonna help with anything, but particularly in my case, it was word problems. It was word problems having to do with various proportions and all this kind of stuff going on in algebra. So I noticed that as we were working through the assignments, there was a lot of text on the page. And because this is a new concept, okay, this concept that we were working through had to do with like inverse and direct relationships and proportions, okay? But it doesn't matter what the concept is. If we're trying a new concept, if we're learning a new concept, if your child is frustrated at all because it's a new concept and they're having a hard time understanding it, what I say is remove barriers. I'm always gonna tell you, and this principle can be applied whether you use a Post-it or not. You always wanna think, what is my goal? What's the objective of this lesson? Is the objective for my child to learn, for in my case, this concept of direct and indirect, I'm saying it wrong, but proportions and algebra? Is that the concept? Or is my concept to force my child to read a bunch of text and tease through it and then pull out information? For right now, my goal was, we need to learn this math concept. So what I do when we start to get overwhelmed, because I said to her, hey, sweet girl, I want you to read the first line of the word problem. And she's trying to rush through it. You know why? The reason she tries to rush through it has to do with a concept called visual discrimination. Visual discrimination, a lot of occupational therapists will use this concept or use this term. They will use visual discrimination. Okay, visual discrimination is how our brains receive and process the information that our eyes take in. So for me, as someone, when I get overwhelmed, if I see a bunch of clutter everywhere, and every mother could probably relate to this, if our eyes have to take in a bunch of clutter, that's why clutter is actually stress-inducing, because our brains are having to take in all of this information and tease through that which we need to focus on. So for my daughter, I literally took this Post-it note or this piece of paper and I covered up 90% of the screen, because we do our math from a screen, and we can print things as well, but this works just as well on a screen if you're learning from a computer or if you're reading from a book. And I literally took the Post-it note, and here's a bunch of text on a piece of paper, so this is really helpful. I took the Post-it note and I covered up as much as I could any extra visual information that her brain would have to process through, not consciously. Our brains aren't telling us on a conscious level, I am now teasing through everything that the brain is receiving right now through your eyes in order to find out what I need to focus on. Your brain is not doing this on a conscious level. There is a thing, there's parts of our brains that God designed that happen in that process without us having to consciously think about it. Praise the Lord that he designed us this way, or else we'd go crazy with all the information in the forefront of our minds, because we would never know what to focus on. So always, if your child is learning a new concept, especially with reading, and I know we don't have a bunch of great light in here, but I wanted to give this to you. You literally cover up all the text, okay? So I covered up anything I didn't want her to read. I wanted her to read the first line about this algebraic formula. Then we pulled it down after she processed that first line, because it was crucial that she understand what she was reading in order to properly set up the math problem. This is a word problem if you're just jumping in. Then we move to the next line, okay? She reads and processes that. Then we move to the next line. Now, the reason this is so deliberate and so intentional, and some people would say, well, that's really laborious. That takes too much time. That's not efficient. Au contraire, absolutely it's efficient, because once your child takes those few extra minutes and is able to process and receive the new information, whether it's reading, writing, a math concept, a science concept, once we allow them just enough wiggle room and the time to actually process the information at hand, then they learn it. And then they can go on. But if we try to rush them through and say, well, they're going to have to learn how to read from a bunch of text anyways, okay, great. Who cares? They can work on that later. First, we need to teach the concept. Always focus on the concept. So for my daughter, we just covered the screen. She learned it like that, by taking those few extra minutes to deliberately cover out any extra visual information. The brain did not have to use any extra energy on a lower level in order to tease through and focus in on what she needed to focus on in order to learn the information. So for example, a lot of our children, they lose their minds when they look at a homework assignment. I'm just picking up like an old text. Okay, they look at a homework assignment or a worksheet if you're a homeschool family, which everyone is homeschooling at some level. Okay, what I'm seeing is not necessarily homeschool. Homeschool is very different than what's being put out there. But the idea is parents are responsible right now for providing some of their child's education. Everyone is in the season. And if you give a child an assignment that's full of text and your child loses their mind and they start to shut down, I can't do this, I don't know. Really? There's a reason that they're doing that. The reason they're saying I can't do it is because their brain is trying to tease through all of the information, know what to focus on, then retrieve that which they just learned in order to apply the information. So when we're learning anything in life, it's like when we do build something from IKEA. You have to take it line by line. Why? Because it's a lot of information. It's overwhelming. So when our child is learning something new, anything new, and any human being does something new, take it step by step, doing less math problems, for example, taking it step by step, but doing it correctly and making sure your child understands, sets your child up to later be able to take on more math problems at a time, or more text to read if they're learning to read, or more of whatever it is. But until you give them the opportunity to receive the information, and visual discrimination, being able to kind of clear out the visual clutter that your brain has to process, is just one easy way to do that. So if we're reading, here's just a book. I just picked up a book from my bookshelf. And even though your child may be, according to the rules, able to read at a 6th grade level or 3rd grade level, it doesn't matter. If they're melting down, that means anxiety is picking up, which means the lower brain region, and this is the way the Lord has designed us, the lower brain, which is more fight, flight, or freeze to keep us alive, that goes into play. That overrides the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which helps us to plan, to override big emotions. That doesn't develop till the 3rd decade of life. So if your child's starting to freak out, they're not doing it 9 times out of 10. They're not doing it because they're trying to be willfully difficult or disobedient. Their brains are literally overwhelmed with how much we are asking them to do. So if we remove barriers, they will more likely make traction and actually learn and process and receive information as anxiety goes down. So even if your child is supposedly able to read this, I don't care. If they're melting down, they're overwhelmed. What do we do as parents and as adults when we're overwhelmed? We have to take a deep breath. We have to self-regulate, and I talk about that all the time. We can go into another video on that. I've got tons of that. But we have learned as adults how to recognize when we're feeling overwhelmed, recognize when we're doing no good for anybody else, and then we modify in order to do our best. So for example, if my schedule is out of control and I am so overwhelmed that I can't even go forward, I have the right as an adult woman to make a decision that I'm going to have to put some stuff, I have to take some stuff off my plate. And as adults, as a parent, our child, we can look at our child and we need to help teach our children how to do that. So for a book like this with a lot of text, something as simple as going line by line now will help your child be able to focus in on the text and make traction. Now, someone might ask this question. If I do this, but my child knows they have to read all of this, they're going to lose their mind. And you're right, they will. So you just say, we're going to set a timer for 5 minutes. And if you give me your best 5 minutes, we'll just do our best. We're just going to work through it together, buddy. We're going to go line by line, and we're going to practice reading, whatever it is. Or you read aloud to them a little bit. You partner read. That was one of the first things I learned in graduate school and when I was doing my student teaching. Partner read. Scaffolding, which is the term we use in the education profession. Scaffolding is providing the supports that the student needs in order to help them learn a concept. Slowly, as they learn the concept and it becomes more embedded in the brain, it becomes more fluent. The brain has developed the pathways to retrieve the information that was learned over time. I always say, small chunks over time yield fruit. I don't care if your child knew what they were doing yesterday when you taught the concept. That's why teachers review. Because by reviewing, you're pulling from a longer, just think you're retrieving from a long-term information and you're bringing it back into the short term. And our goal with supporting our children is we support them until they don't need the support anymore. And we slowly build and we slowly build. Another thing with math problems, and this is the last little thing I'm going to give you. And if you have any questions, you can chime in. And if you don't, that's great. Make sure to share this with someone because there's a mom losing her mind right now thinking that she's a failure if her kid doesn't do 50,000 math problems. Problem is, if we try to shove 50,000 math problems into a brain that can only handle 5 and learn them well, then we go nowhere. We make zero progress. So for any math problems, if you have tons and tons of math problems on a sheet of paper and your child has just learned the concept, do not force them to do all of them on one sheet of paper. Take a math problem, for example, 28 times 2. Say your children are just learning 2-digit multiplication by 1 digit. Sorry, this isn't the cleanest board. This is not a decimal point. This is probably completely backwards to you, but you get the idea. We'll do 11 times 11, then I can't really mess it up, okay? Take a whiteboard, a sheet of paper, one problem that they have to navigate at a time. The less visual clutter that they see, the lower anxiety is going to be. The more likely they will be able to process and receive and accurately learn and effectively learn. I don't care. I know people say, and I am the biggest proponent of math facts. There is no one who thinks math facts are more important than I do. And I offer tons of strategies for how to learn the math facts, and because those are so important. In this season, I'm just going to repeat it. If your child is struggling at all with their math facts, capture this season and you focus on them in fun ways. Have your kid play on the swing set and flash flashcards, okay? There's ways to do that. So important. However, my point was this. I am all about the fact that kids need to know their facts. Eventually, it will happen. However, when we're learning bigger concepts, and forgive me if this is backwards, I've actually never used a whiteboard on here. So for something like this, when your child is learning something harder, okay, I would rather a student do 5 of these and get them right, or 2 of these each day over the time period of a week and get them correct because their brain was not in fight or flight and they were actually able to understand and do them correctly. I would rather do 2 of this concept every day for a week, or maybe twice a day, once in the morning, once at night, if it's a new concept, than I would ever want to hand them a sheet of 15 or 20 on one piece of paper math problems like this, new concept that hasn't been embedded into the brain with natural pathways from long-term to short-term memory. I would much rather see 2 a day correct over time than try to give my kid a sheet of 20 of these math problems and have them get 70% crying, melting down, losing their mind any day, because this will serve your child long term. Your child needs to know how to do this. So what do we need to do? Pull back the barriers. Visual overstimulation is it can be a huge barrier to any child's learning. Step back, focus on this concept. I always say, focus on the goal. What is the goal? The goal is they will learn 3-digit by 2-digit multiplication. However, if you're someone who's just a little bit, if you're in the 3-digit by 2-digit multiplication or anything by 2-digit multiplication, the last little thing I'm going to show you that I do with my students, particularly anyone who's struggling, I set it up for them ahead of time. This is another layer of scaffolding. Have them focus in. So I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm actually going to do a whole thing on math eventually on these some of these harder math situations. I take one math problem, new concept, okay? 6 times 8, right? 48, okay? Now, I know Common Core is out there. Common Core is going to go. Educational policy changes all the time. Math doesn't change, okay? So I want my child to know how to do this. So I'm not worried about Common Core. So if you have to focus on Common Core, forgive me, I am not your person. I'm thinking long term. 6 times 8, 48, okay? There's our 4 tens goes in the tens. I have my 8 ones or units. Okay, I move it over. Stick with me because there's a reason to my math. There's a method to my madness. 6 times 2 is 12. Okay, add the 4, 16. Say it out loud. Have your child always say it out loud. Okay, 6 times 3, 18. Carry the 1, 19. Oh, I forgot a place. Okay, here's the next step. Have your child, if you're using a whiteboard, this is the advantage of a whiteboard. Have them erase everything else that's there. Remove anything that could possibly visually be caught by their eyes and accidentally thrown into the next math problem. Cover this up. You're done with that 6. No more. Now we move over. I've made it visually very clear what my student needs to look at and what they need to focus on in order to go through the process. And I literally will walk through this process. 1 times 8, and I have them say it out loud. Why? Another part of the brain. They're hearing it, and they're using the part of the brain that it's responsible for speech. 1 times 8 is 8. We'll actually put the 0 because we've moved over. Now we're in the tens column. Okay? 1 times 8 is 8. Okay, I'm not carrying anything. Darn it. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 3 is 3. And then walk through it again. 8, 14. And obviously I would go through this a little more methodically with my student. 3 plus 1, 5. Always remove visual barriers when a child is struggling. These habits of removing the visual barriers will become habits that naturally set your child up for success later on, because as we know, math builds upon itself. The speaking out loud is so important. Again, you're equipping your child when you give them these strategies, all these scaffolding techniques that we use, all these things that you think it's cheating. It's not cheating. You're providing your child with what they need in order to learn. These tools and strategies, this is a tool in your tool belt they will be able to use for the rest of their lives, for the rest of their academic life. So anyways, that was my spiel on visual discrimination. If you have a friend or someone who has a child who is struggling in this season with learning, obviously I navigate behavioral challenges as well. Just know that you've been chosen by God on purpose to raise this child. You are the child's parent. The child's parent is always our first and primary teacher. You will be with your child for the rest of their younger years and hopefully all the way into adulthood. Focus on relationship. Focus on relationship and always think, what would I have needed as a student in order to have gotten to the next step? When I'm feeling overwhelmed, what do I need? Do I need someone yelling at me or adding pressure to me? No, we don't. Always think, what would I need in order to get to the next step to learn something? Visual discrimination. For those of us like me that get overwhelmed with clutter and dirt and garbage everywhere and clutter and toys, You all understand what it means to have struggles with visual discrimination. It causes stress, anxiety, and fear. One problem at a time, then that leads to 2 problems at a time. That leads to 3, that leads to 4, that leads to 5. That leads to growth, which is what we want. When our kids know things solidly in their brain and concepts solidly, and we're not pushing them to hurry up and get through to get to the next level, they make huge strides in a short amount of time. Reach out if you have any questions. If you'd like to work with me directly, work on some individualized homeschool planning and coaching so we can walk alongside you and your uniquely designed child, I would love to work with you. Reach out to me, PM me, or go to www.aheartforallstudents.com. You guys are awesome. Bye. Have a great day.